7 years ago, we both quit our full-time jobs, and finally, after 11 years of living in the UK on Cordelia, we let the lines go and headed to the Mediterranean. And it was wonderful, both the trip down along the Atlantic coast and into the Mediterranean. We spent about 2.5 years there, sailing through France, Spain, Italy, Malta, Greece. It was wonderful. And then on our second winter in Ragusa, Sicily, we decided that we were going to head to the Caribbean. Some of the sailing community that we were living with in Ragusa thought we were crazy. Some thought that we were, they encouraged us because they'd come from the Caribbean. So 3 years ago, we left the Mediterranean and headed off across the Atlantic to experience the Caribbean. Today, we've decided that we want to share with you what we have learned about the Mediterranean and the Caribbean, the differences between the two. After visiting 22 countries and islands and travelling over 15,000 miles and living aboard 7 years full-time, we've put together some categories with the differences between the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. We have our favourite. I wonder if you have your favourite. I wonder if you'll know what our favourite is. Once you've watched the episode, let us know in the comments below what you would prefer or what you already prefer and where you would rather sail. We are Steve and Gus, and this is our beautiful Venus 46 ketch. We're currently in Belize taking a break from a major refit that we started 10 months ago. Life is for living and we don't want to waste a minute of it. Wind and weather.
In the first category, we'll talk about the weather between the Mediterranean and the Caribbean. In the Med, you've got all sorts of different winds, the Meltemi, the Mistral, katabatic winds that come down off the mountains and cut through an anchorage in the blink of an eye, and they can really catch you out, and we've been caught out a few times. It's not all the time, but it happens quite regularly. The winds are very fickle in the Mediterranean. We got caught out by one of these freak winds that just came out of nowhere, unforecast, 70 knots, blasted us for an hour. It was scary. So the Med, different types of winds, and then you get long periods where there is no wind. You want to get somewhere, the wind's in the wrong direction and there's not a lot of it. So you do get the Mediterranean, Medi, motor every day. Somebody told us that before we went there. They're true. The difference between the Mediterranean and the Caribbean weather is consistent trade winds. In the Caribbean, coming across the Atlantic, you get the consistent trade winds of anything between 50 and 25 knots, all from the same direction. So it makes it easy to sail between the islands, up between the islands. You do get gusts between the islands that you have to be careful of, but it's a very steady wind. And the only strange patterns that you get, not strange, but you've got the hurricane season that you have to be aware of. But it's very well forecast and you tend to get plenty of notice about the hurricanes. So you can still cruise within the hurricane season as long as you're out of the kind of zones. In the Mediterranean, you really only cruise for 6 or 7 months a year. It's rare that people cruise the whole year in the Med. You tend to go into a marina for 5 or 6 months when the worst of the weather and the cold goes through. So wind and weather and warmth, hands down for us, the Caribbean. It's great sailing.
Anchorages and marinas. Sorry about the hair, I've just been in swimming. The next category is all about anchoring and marinas. In the Caribbean, you can anchor almost anywhere. In some places in the BVIs, you can only take mooring buoys. And on some of the other islands, that is the case, but not in all anchorages. Generally speaking, anchorages in the Caribbean are everywhere and there's not many people. There are very few marinas in the Caribbean, very few. And even when you do find a marina, they're not huge, they're not massive. They probably hold maximum 50 boats. Whereas in the Mediterranean, very different. The anchorages tend to be quite deep in a lot of places, and there is a lot of med mooring where you go stern to and you tie off on the land. There's a lot of that goes on across the Med. And there are lots of marinas, but they can be expensive. In the Balearics, back in 2020, when we were changing our batteries, we gave a marina a call when we were in Mallorca, and they said, yeah, come on over. It's €350 for one night. Obviously, we gave that a miss. We actually put the batteries on at anchor. But marinas are needed in the Mediterranean, where, as Steve has already said, you can move around in the Caribbean during hurricane season. When it's winter in the Mediterranean, most people tend to sign up to go into a marina somewhere for 5, 6, 7 months because it does get cold in the Med. So not so easy to move around. So yeah, anchoring in the Caribbean definitely is a lot easier, not so crowded, and lots of anchorages that aren't that deep as well. Underwater world. This one I'll keep short because the footage here tells the story better than I can. The Caribbean underwater is world class. Coral reefs, turtles, rays, tropical fish and colours you genuinely didn't know existed. If you snorkel or dive, the Caribbean will ruin you in the best way possible. The Mediterranean is clear, beautifully clear, but it's been heavily overfished for years and years. The reef systems just aren't there in the same way. You'll see dolphins offshore. We've had some great encounters in the Med, and the Posidonia seagrass is actually vital for the ecosystem. But if you're expecting Caribbean level underwater sea life, forget it. And that's okay. The Med has other things, but underwater, Caribbean, clear winner. Culture. This category is a difficult one. Culture. We saw some wonderful things in the Mediterranean, thousands of years old. We went to Rome and saw the Colosseum, the Trevi Fountain. Just blows your mind how old some of those things are there. And you don't quite get that in the Caribbean. You do in the Western Caribbean because the Mayan temples are just as amazing. The Mediterranean has minimum 5,000 years history there. We anchored in bays that the ancient Greeks used. We stood outside the Colosseum where the chariots once roared through those doors. The Caribbean, on the other hand, is very relaxed, laid back, reggae. It has colonial history, British, Dutch, French. You do see a lot of that throughout the Eastern Caribbean. So we'd have to say that this one really is a draw. Because sailing around the Caribbean might not have the monumental architecture that you see throughout the Mediterranean, but it does have history. A final thing on this particular category, and this is just our opinion, don't forget, but I've heard this said, the Mediterranean is like a school with amazing field trips. The Caribbean feels like life is the school. If you think about that, I think that's very true. We don't see so many children on boats in the Caribbean, and those that do are definitely just flying through to get to the Panama Canal. They don't spend a great deal of time in the Caribbean. But we do and have seen lots and lots of family boats, family cruisers in the Mediterranean. Overall, as I said before, it is definitely a draw. The sailing community. The next category, the sailing community, quite surprised me actually when I started to think about it. The Caribbean sailing community is one of the tightest knitted communities I've ever known. They still have VHF nets almost every port, every morning. That's not to say that you don't have sailing communities or cruising communities in the Mediterranean. You definitely do. We experienced it, but it's more close-knit in the Caribbean. A lot more organised events ashore. And we haven't just experienced that here in Guatemala. We also experienced that when we were in Grenada and in St. Martin, where groups of cruisers will get together and organise trips out for the day. Didn't feel and didn't see so much of that in the Mediterranean. Every island in the Caribbean has its own Facebook group. Every island has its own trade and sell Facebook group.
We have made lifelong friends on both sides of the Atlantic because whilst many people lay up their boats in the Caribbean during hurricane season and head home, in the winter in the Mediterranean, the community becomes part of the cruising life. The Caribbean cruising community has a real sense of togetherness. People share information, lend a hand and genuinely look out for each other. It feels like a supportive, floating neighbourhood. In contrast, the Mediterranean can be more independent, with boats often keeping to themselves. For many cruisers, it's that spirit of cooperation that makes the Caribbean stand out. Passage making.
So in this section, we're talking about passage making, sailing. Sailing in the Caribbean versus sailing in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean, you can sail, but sometimes it's quite difficult. The wind isn't always going where you want to go. Invariably it's on the nose, or there's too much wind or not enough wind. You motor a lot more in the Mediterranean. There's day sailing that you might do an occasional overnight passage. But generally speaking, you can day sail around quite easily in the Mediterranean. You can also do that in the Caribbean. The big difference is the trade winds. The trade winds go from east to west, and when they're kicked in nicely, you're getting a steady 15 to 25 knots every day. For Cordelia, being a heavy boat, 25 knots is great. That's where she gets in her groove, and we can sail nicely. And you can sail up and down the island chain on the Eastern Caribbean. And each island is less than a day sail, but you can have a really great sail. It gets a bit lively at times. You do get squalls come through, but they're very short-lived. But you get that beautiful trade wind sailing, and you really can't beat it. For serious blue water passage making, the Caribbean is in a different league. It's a great experience.
Provisioning and boat parts.
This one's going to be another short one, provisioning. This one's for me. So, obviously there are supermarkets in the Caribbean, lots of them. There are certain islands where it's really easy to get food. Martinique is one of them, St. Martin was another one. But then you've got the islands like Grenada, Carriacou, where it is difficult. We were in Carriacou for a few weeks a couple of years ago, and for 3 weeks we didn't have eggs or potatoes, none at all on the island. They weren't being delivered to Grenada, which meant that they weren't being transported over to Carriacou. Now for us they're kind of basics. Things like yogurts are very difficult to get in Grenada. Often when something does arrive in the shop, it's gone very, very quickly. Whereas in the Mediterranean, there are lots and lots more supermarkets. The variety is more European. Stocks don't seem to run out. The number of different supermarkets there are is far in excess of what there is in the Caribbean. Fruit and veg is very easy to get in the Caribbean. You often have to pick what they've got rather than what you necessarily want, just whatever is in season. Whereas in Europe, you generally can get any fruit any time of the year because they're importing it from across the world. Whereas in the Caribbean, apart from a small amount that is imported, they are using what they are growing. Boat parts also comes in under this section, and without doubt, getting boat parts in the Mediterranean is easier than it is in the Caribbean. They do have boat shops, chandleries, whatever you like to call them, throughout the Caribbean, but stock comes in intermittently and it's not always what you want. So trying to order it in, you can wait weeks and weeks for it. Whereas in the Mediterranean, even if you have to order it online, generally speaking, it does come through fairly quickly. So for this section, absolutely, definitely the Mediterranean is a lot easier for food and boat parts.
Customs and bureaucracy.
Just going to put my hand over his dirty mark on his t-shirt.
It's not a dirty mark, it's a stain. I suppose the stain is a dirty mark, but it's from honest toil.
This section is customs and bureaucracy. What a horrible word to say.
Bureaucracy. It's because you can't roll your arse.
No, I can't. Anyway.
Before we go too in-depth in this section, remember all your boat documents, your bill of sale, your insurance and your boat registration. You should have at least 3 copies of them, and always keep a photocopy of your passport as well. 99 times out of 100, you will need each copy when you go to check in to a country. And that brings me on to the next bit. If you haven't got a printer on board, it's quite advisable to get one. We don't get a kickback here, but we purchased the Canon TR150. And as you can see, it really is quite small. Printing and photocopy shops throughout the Caribbean are quite difficult to find, and even in some parts of the Mediterranean.
The Caribbean, every island has its own check-in and check-out customs and immigration. That can take anything from 5 minutes to half a day to do, depending on which island you're in. The easiest of the islands are the French islands, because you can do it online. And unless you need a ZARP, which is a document to say what country you have been in that you need to take to your next country, and then without a doubt the French islands are the easiest, because you don't even need to go into an office. You do it all online, check in and check out. You can also extend visas as well. In Grenada, for example, you can go there, you can spend 90 days and then you just go to the immigration and you just
extend for another 90 days. Pay an additional fee and you get an additional 90 days. So the Caribbean makes it very easy as a cruiser to stay longer.
So in the Mediterranean, if you're from Europe, very easy. The free movement means you can go in and out of countries, no problem at all.
But we're no longer European. So
or the Brits aren't.
The Brits aren't. We fall into the same category as the Americans, the Australians, the New Zealanders.
Where we only get 90 days in a rolling 180 days. The Schengen areas, which covers most of the Mediterranean, with the exception of places like Tunisia, Albania, Turkey, that fall out of the Schengen zone, all those other countries does mean that you can only spend 90 days there in a rolling 180 day. So in our opinion, definitely the Caribbean is easier to cruise.
Yeah.
There are costs to checking in and out in the Caribbean, and they vary from country to country. The French islands, it's £5, or to our most expensive, which has been Belize so far, and that was how much?
$250, the equivalent of for 30 days.
Unfortunately, we don't have experience of costs in the Mediterranean. Apart from the UTEPI that we had to pay for in Greece, there are cruising permits that you need in some of the countries, and also you need to purchase transit logs in some countries as well. So for us, long-term cruising, the Caribbean is definitely much easier. The wow moment.
The last section is scenery and wow moments. I can't call this one.
They're both great. They're both, but different.
You come to the Caribbean and the waters are amazing. The sea life is amazing. The clearness of the water. In the Mediterranean, you can anchor, you look up, and there's the Acropolis.
Or some other ancient ruin that just takes your breath away.
And you don't get that in the Caribbean. The Mediterranean makes you stop and wonder just at the enormity and the
sense of history.
Yeah.
Over thousands of years, and it's just incredible.
When we went to Rome and walked around, we could have stayed there for 2 weeks and not seen the same thing twice. It was incredible. Absolutely incredible. And you don't get that anywhere in the Caribbean. We also walked up Volcana, which was amazing. And then there's Stromboli just across the water that is spewing volcanic Malta all the time, constantly.
You don't get rainforests in the Mediterranean. You don't get palm fringe beaches. You don't get coconuts. It's just really different, and we love both.
So the final thing is which one we would choose, the Caribbean or the Mediterranean. For us, it's
Caribbean.
Definitely, hands down, the Caribbean. For 7 days a week, 12 months a year, all-round weather, the Caribbean, definitely.
And I think for us as economical cruisers, as in we're not rich, Caribbean is easier to live economically, I think. If you've got a well-prepared boat and you're carrying a reasonable amount of spares with you and you're pretty good at fixing it yourself, Caribbean is working out really well for us. Would you say?
Yeah. And if you haven't seen how much it's cost us to live this lifestyle for the last 7 years, then I'll put a link to it up here. So for us, definitely it's the Caribbean.
Thank you all for watching, and a massive thanks to our Patreon and Coffee supporters. We really appreciate the support you give us. Did you know that our Patreon supporters get extra snippets and additional content from us? Why don't you pop over to our Patreon site and have a look. Have a great week, everyone. Thanks for watching. Ciao for now.